Hello everybody, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to be talking about how much exactly it cost me as a modular pilot to get my frozen ATPL and into the right hand seat. So remember, if you find this useful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. So I'll get straight into it then. If you just want to know what the total figure is, it's 65k. But for those of you that want to know how it was broken up and where I pitched my training, feel free to stay tuned. So how did I spend 65k on modular training? Certainly I could have done it for a lot cheaper, and I made the deliberate decision, if you like, to pitch it at like the premium end of modular flight training. You can certainly do it for cheaper, but there are certain compromises that I didn't want to make and certain ones that I did make. So hopefully this video will try and give you an idea of how you can adjust the experience for what you want to pay and what you want to get out of it. So the first stage then was my private pilot's license. This would normally cost about 10k, but I managed to get it all for free. Video in the top right showing how I managed to get my PPL for free. By the way, all the prices I give are in UK GBP pounds. So for my hour building, to get my 100 hours pilot in command, I spent around about £12,000. You probably could have done this for cheaper, but it was just the option that I went with. At the time I had a full-time job, so I could only really hour build at the weekends. So the best option for me at the time was just to get an hour building package with A&T, and there's a link in the description. So I paid my annual fee, and the hourly rate was basically £100 an hour. Now you're wondering, well, how do you manage to get 100 hours at £100 an hour and spend 12,000? Well, it includes things like a landing fee and so on. So I just said per average hour, my cost was around about £120 an hour. Now, if I was willing to do it in a slightly smaller aircraft, I did my hour building mostly in a Piper Cherokee. I could have done it in the 150, but probably 10 or 15 pounds an hour less. And this is another option that if you're trying to cut costs, that's another way of doing it. How else could you potentially save money during your hour building? Look at getting into a no equity scheme, or even getting a share in your own aircraft. Both have all their pros and cons, but for me, it was really important that I could have an access to an aircraft when I wanted it, and AT were absolutely brilliant in allowing me to do so. So the next expense I had was my ATPL distance learning. I spent around about £5,000, and it was with CATS Aviation. I think that's probably about an average figure for that. It's difficult to get it for much less, particularly once you include your exam fees in that. What I was lucky is I didn't have to pay for accommodation, as my parents live fairly near where the brush-up classes were being held, so that was one expense that I didn't have to incur. So the next expense that I had was for my night rating, and again I did it at A&T in Blackpool, and that was exactly £1,000. I think again that's round about an average amount to pay in a Cherokee. You can probably get it for slightly cheaper if you're willing to do it in a 150, so yeah, that's another option if you want to save a little bit of cash. So one of the optional extras which I did, which you don't have to do, was I did an IMC rating, and that cost £3,000. Again, you don't really have to do that, but I was out building in the UK where the weather could be iffy at times, so that kind of helped me just get through my hour building, and just put it there as an option in case you wanted to consider doing that. So once I had my 70 hours pilot in command, I was able to start my multi-engine piston rating, and then subsequently my multi-engine instrument rating via the competency-based route. For the MEP and the IR, I spent around about 25,000 in total, and that includes the skills test and aircraft hire and so on. I'd say, yeah, 25 grand is about a reasonable budget on a twin. I did mine in DA42, which tends to be a little bit more expensive, but if you can find a flying school that will let you do it in a Dutchess or Seneca, that's not too mainstream, you can probably save, 5 or 10% on the figure that I've just quoted there. The other thing just to add is, if you have done an IMC rating, one of the really good things to do is if you can do your IMC rating with a school that does a basic instrument flight module. I put up a video top right previously that talks about the advantage from that, and if you can do a basic instrument flight module before you start your IR, then potentially you can knock 10 hours off your IR. So yeah, that's another little bit of advice if you are going down the IMC route and trying to get a little bit of saving. Alternatively, if you go down the IMC rating route and you go down the competency-based instrument rating, then potentially you can save a little bit more cash that way as well. Now, in terms of financial planning on my IR, one of the mistakes that I made was I just did pay-as-you-go, which is okay in most cases. But unfortunately, the school that I was with wasn't doing great financially, and unfortunately they eventually went out of business. So occasionally I'll turn up and see that they've increased the prices by 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, or whatever. So my IR was getting more expensive as I was going along. A good bit of advice I'd give is try and lock in a price in advance for the approved training or the minimum training that you need, and then you can negotiate with the school how you pay, maybe on a block basis. What you want to try and avoid is handing all your cash over at the front in case the school goes bust. But equally, the flight school needs to have cash to be able to operate. So it's one of these where you just kind of need to judge it. What worked really well for me on a different course was I just paid based on 25% increments. So as I got through 25% of the course, I'll pay the next tranche. Got through the next 25%, pay the next, and then when I got 75%, I paid the final bit. So it just split the risk, but also meant the flying school I wasn't going negative on my account in the flying school, and equally I wasn't paying up too much cash up front. So the next one now was my CPL course. One of the biggest ways and the best ways to save money on your CPL is to do your CPL on a single engine piston aircraft. A lot of schools now will do it as standard on the twin and the DA42, but that's a lot more expensive and it doesn't have to be on the twin. So my CPL all in costs 10,000, but that includes examiner fee, aircraft hire for the exam, and a little bit of brush up on top of the normal course, because after I finished my CPL course, there was a delay of about 2 or 3 weeks before I could do my CPL skills test, and in that time I just fancied doing an extra hour or two just to get ready on the actual day. So yeah, 10 grand tends to be about a nice one if you're doing it in a single. Maybe add an extra 5,000 on top of that if you do it in a twin. But as I say, if you want to save a bit of cash, then just do your CPL in a single engine piston aircraft. There's no requirement to do it in a twin. Wondering why I did my CPL? I did my CPL at West Air, again in Blackpool, and that was on a part-time basis. Basically every Sunday I would come in and do my CPL lessons, and that worked really well. I didn't have to fork out for accommodation because I just came from home. So again, if you can get your flying close to your accommodation, then that also saves you a lot of cash, so you don't have to pay twice, if you see what I mean. Other costs during my flight training, which you don't necessarily need to incur. I bought a Bose A20 headset. Again, that's not a mandatory piece of equipment. You can buy more cheaper headsets, but it was just, you know, what I wanted to do at the time. And then the other thing that I did was I got an EFB, so it's basically just an iPad mini that cost about £500, and then my Skydemon subscription, I think it was about 100 or something for the year. And then also for my IR, I got 4 flights with the jet plates overlaid on 4 flights. Again, that's an extra luxury that you don't really need, but for me, I just found it to be quite useful, as I thought, hey, you're spending like, you know, 25 grand on an IR course, and might as well just get decent plates so you're not messing about in the aircraft. So the final part of my training was my MCC course, all in. And although the course doesn't cost 10 grand itself, I just put aside 10 grand because I had to also pay for my accommodation in Cambridge. I did the APS MCC with VA, which was absolutely amazing. And although it's more expensive and it's at a premium, I can reliably say I would not have had the job opportunities that I had I not done that MCC course. I already put a video up saying which MCC course should I do. Check out top right, just to go through some of the rationale on why I chose the APS MCC versus the regular MCC. So yeah, that's basically it for all the mandatory costs. Just some of the other costs that maybe are not as well advertised that you maybe want to think about, particularly during your flight training. So one of the ones is after you finished your flight training, most people are dead broke, fair enough, I was exactly the same, but you're going to hopefully COVID-19 gets over and the world starts to return to normality, have the opportunity to go for airline assessment. On average, I was finding each airline assessment cost me around about £1,000 to attend. Now you're like, how do you spend £1,000 on an airline assessment? Well, first of all, you're not going to have many opportunities to go for airline assessment, so it's pretty prudent to try and present yourself in the best possible light. So the first thing that you'll probably need if there's been a gap since you did your MCC course to your airline assessment is you'll need some sim prep. So straight away that's like £500 to get a couple of hours in an FTD. And then on top of that, you also then need your transport and accommodation to get for your sim prep, and then also your transport and accommodation for the actual assessment and your food. So you're not getting much change back from £1,000. So it's good to keep a little bit back. So, and let's say, you know, if the market is buoyant, like for me it was, you end up with 3, 4, 5 assessments. That's straight away 5 grand that you have to spend. So it's worth thinking about. And if you have the opportunity to keep working whilst you're doing your flight training, then that's a great thing, because the expenses do not go away even after you've got a job. After you've got a job, most airlines will put you on a type rating course, and for cadet opportunities, the majority of type rating courses are not paid. So again, you've got 3 months or so whilst you're doing a type rating where you've got to self-fund and sustain yourself. And again, some airlines may charge a bond or deposit for your type rating, and it's important that you have the cash in the bank to be able to pay the bond or the deposit for your type rating to get the opportunity. Hopefully this crisis recovers and things start to get normal. Who knows when that will be. But for you guys that are in the training pool and for those that have been furloughed like myself, just keep going and absolutely things will eventually get better. Anyway guys, thanks for tuning in. If you like the video, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Stay safe guys. Cheers.